4, 3, 2, 1.
Good morning everyone, good morning plebeians, afternoon and evening as well. Today is Tuesday, we are approaching reset day in NA, tomorrow is gonna be EU as well. We have to check on what we haven't checked last week properly, which is the raid situation at the moment. We have looked at Mythic Plus a couple of days ago, so now what's left is to look at raid encounters. We have just gotten out a patch of balance tuning, a hotfix set of balance tuning, which had avoided, as we know, has avoided a Destruction Warlock, which will be delayed to Season 4, so the only reasonable thing that we have to check is the buff given to Affliction Warlock. We have also gotten some single target damage buffs to Vengeance and Guardian tanks, but let's take a look, let's compare how things are going in the raid as we are approaching the next season. So perhaps it might also start be interesting for some players, for some of you, to start looking at which spec to play for the next season. This is a pretty common occurrence, right? Once a patch is about to end, you start thinking, should I continue to play with my current character? Should I go and play something else? If I want to go and play something else, I should probably look at how things are going for that spec. Even if I like Feral Druid, perhaps maybe the situation of Feral is not so good, so healthy that I would want to play it, etc, etc. So taking a look at how the raid has been going so far, compared to the last time we looked at and compared to the start of 9.2.5, so we're talking about, I think, 3 resets ago, when we got the buffs to Windwalker, to Outlaw, to Arms, to Arcane, to Beast Mastery, and then this last patch where we got the buff to Affliction. What has changed? Well, at the top, not too much compared to the last time. We still have Windwalker Monk and we still have Outlaw Rogue, the 2 buffed melee specs of 9.2.5 together with Arms that are still doing quite well, and we have the same top specs we have seen before at this point: Destruction, Demonology, Frost Death Knight, Survival Hunter, and the 2 Shaman specs. The new entry for this week is Assassination, which is now getting a little bit higher. At the same time as Assassination getting a little bit higher, we also have Subtlety getting further and further down. Now they are even in the bottom 4, which is quite interesting. If you look at this, the old situation of Subtlety, they have gotten quite a drop in performance, even though Subtlety, technically speaking, was not really nerfed in this season, right? Subtlety was just left as it was, but it has lost over time a lot of its power. Perhaps some of the sub-rogues in the comment can enlighten the rest of us as to why they have fallen so clearly compared to, not just compared to the other specs, but also compared to the 2 other rogue specs, in particular Assassination, because Outlaw at the very least has the excuse that it was buffed, but Assassination not really, yet Assassination is keeping up just fine. The other spec that was buffed was Arms for the melee DPS, which is now, again, still in the middle of the pack-ish. However, there is another thing worth mentioning as far as middle of the pack is concerned, which is the other spec that was buffed. This one, though, was only last week, so it's barely been a full reset of this buff, which is Affliction. Affliction got all of its damage increased by 5%, and the result is that they went from basically the bottom to the middle of the pack. And this is a similar treatment that we saw with Arms Warrior. Arms Warrior was also towards the bottom, and after the buff they are now averaging middle of the pack. Affliction seems to have the same result so far in terms of performance, which is kind of interesting. Most of the other specs have not really moved one way or another, for better or for worse. Meanwhile, when it comes to the popularity, we have a few changes, actually, for once in this recap video. Number 1 is we see the passing of the torch. For the first time, basically, this season, Destruction Warlock has managed to pass Balanced Druid. That's all that I wanted to point out. For the top specs, Balance has been at the top for almost the entirety of the expansion when it comes to popularity, but this time around, Destruction, perhaps it was happy Warlocks, knowing that the nerf to Destruction was being delayed to Season 4, they went even harder in playing Destruction, even though the nerf in Raid Encounters wasn't going to hit them as hard, honestly. Other specs at the top, compared to last time, we do have the continuous switcheroo between Beast Mastery and Marksmanship. Perhaps, as I said, this might have been because of the buff that Beast Mastery has received. in 9.2.5. Now Beast Mastery has successfully passed marksmanship and now has gapped them by quite a bit and has placed itself in the top 4, looking like they will be sieging Havoc Demon Hunter to enter the top 3. Talking about rising and falling, there is also the widening of the gap between Fire Mage and Frost Mage. Now Fire is more present compared to Frost, also thanks to their better performance. At the very least, in overall performance, Fire is doing better than Frost by quite a bit. There is also, of course, with Subtlety getting so much worse overall and Outlaw doing so much better, what do we see is that now the previously much higher Subtlety and the previously much lower Outlaw are currently next to each other. And I would give it almost for granted that by next week, by our next recap, we will see Outlaw comfortably passing Subtlety in popularity. It is kind of interesting though that despite this loss of power of Subtlety, which has brought them to be much less played, we don't actually see any growth for Assassination, which is also doing fine in the raid, but it continues to be one of the least played specs, even less than Feral Druid. It is always quite worrying when you're less played than a Feral Druid. These are just about the most changes you will see when it comes to the popularity of the DPS specs. If you wanted to see some trends of which specs are getting more played and which specs are getting less played, these are the results. There are pretty much no results to be had or to be seen when we are talking about tanks and healers. The situation is far too immobile to change this fast, this later into the tier, because of course Blood and Brewmaster will remain the main picks when it comes to tanks, even though Guardian and Vengeance have just gotten buffed in their damage. Number 1 is not enough. It doesn't really change anything. Number 2, even if it was enough, they still don't bring enough things into the raid at the moment to just bring them for their single target damage, so it doesn't really amount to anything when it comes to popularity. Same goes for healers. There hasn't really been a significant change when it comes to healers. There is still this gap between Holy Priest and the rest of the healers. Resto Druid is still getting very close to Restoration Shaman after passing Holy Paladin. This is a quite interesting similar trend than what we have seen in Mythic Plus, the passing of Holy Paladin by Resto Druid. It's also happening in the raid as well. What I also wanted to point out today, since we are talking about the raid, obviously we have to talk about what we haven't talked about a couple of days ago, which is the yet another round of massive nerfs happening to the raid. Why? Because it's coming now. Because it's coming this reset in NA by the time this video is out, more or less, and in EU tomorrow. It's another gigantic round of nerfs. I said it probably 3 nerfs ago, that at that point, 3 nerfs ago, Blizzard sort of stopped pretending they were even trying to keep the raid somewhat competitive. They just gave up completely and started giving some massive round of nerfs, and they have continued time after time until what we get here. So Anduin, Lords of Dread, Rygalon, and more importantly the Jailer are all getting gigantic nerfs. Anduin is getting the HP of its adds nerfed by 20% in Heroic and Normal, and the movement of the adds you need to heal has been slowed by 15% in Heroic and Normal to make them easier to heal. And Grim Fate, which is the add empowerment buff in the Anduin fight, has been reduced from 200 to 150% in Mythic. Lords of Dread, boss health reduced by 10% in all difficulties just because. And the Swarm of Decay and the Swarm of Darkness, the big AoEs the boss are going to be doing, has been nerfed by 15% in Heroic difficulty. Rygalon also, why not, gets a full flat out 10% HP nerf across the board, across all difficulties, and the damage of the Dark Corruption has been reduced by 75% in Heroic difficulty. These already seem like massive nerfs, but the real icing on the cake on the round of nerfs is the list of nerfs given to the Jailer. This is even too much, perhaps too depressing to even go over and look at all of these sets of nerfs. The amount of difficulty that this reduces is staggering. The Surging Azerite damage increase stack that you can gain was increased from 3% to 7%, which means that when you get 3 stacks, instead of doing 9% more damage, you are doing 21% more damage, which means that at the end of phase 3 and the start of phase 4, when you take 6 stacks, you're doing 42% more damage instead of 18% with Bloodlust and with potions. it's massive. There is a series of nerfs left and right. You know, you no longer get the knockback. You know, the Decimator ability, the big slam of the Jailer in Heroic and Mythic no longer knockbacks you. So you have no more fear of getting knocked back into the holes. You have no more fear of getting knocked back into other people's torments. Not at all. Mind controls. We started this fight where you had 4 mind controls. Then they were nerfed to having 3 mind controls and having 30% less of an absorb shield needed to break them. Then the absorb shield was nerfed by 15%, and now the amount of casts of this mind control mechanic is going to happen only 3 times in phase 2 instead of 4 times. You also have plenty of other nerfs. You know, previously you had 4 chains of anguish you needed to break, then it was nerfed to 3 chains of anguish, and now those 3 chains of anguish do 30% less damage in Mythic difficulty. It's not just Mythic, there is also plenty of nerfs happening to Heroic as well, you know, like Decimator no longer knocking you back, Rune of Damnation having 15% less damage, Dominating Will, the absorb shield of the mind controls being 15% weaker, Chain Breaker damage reduction is also happening in Heroic as well, so just a whole slew of nerfs for the Jailer as a proof that that something was wrong. You know, I sort of foretold this when I started seeing this super fast set of nerfs, wondering why was Blizzard accelerating so much. If Dragonflight is releasing in March and Season 4 is releasing in October, why are we getting so many fast nerfs so quickly? Well, turns out because Dragonflight is supposed to be released before December the 31st, and because Season 4 is happening in 25 days. So Blizzard was starting to accelerate the speed at which guilds can complete the Ride of the Curve and Cutting Edge before it gets removed by the start of next month. So yes, a significant set of nerfs. I'm sure some of you might be a little bit disappointed. They might have wanted to see the last bosses, perhaps Raigalon and the Jailer, not in their full difficulty, because by the time the world first guilds got done with them, they were nerfed like 7 times each, but perhaps not in as much of a nerfed state as what they are in now. That might perhaps have disappointed a few players who wanted to get a bit of more of a challenge with this type of bosses, or perhaps you don't give a shit whatsoever, you just care about your title or your mount coming from the Jailer. That's acceptable as well. Talking about boss difficulty, we can also actually see the difference in boss difficulty with the last 2 rounds of nerfs. Before this even bigger round of nerf coming this reset, we had the difficulty of the last 5 bosses as 9.2.5 was launching. As you can see, you have Lihuvim at 5.6% and then all the way down to the Jailer being very low. And then if you compare this to now, we can see that Anduin, Halondrus, Raigalon all have gotten significantly easier to defeat compared to previous weeks. The only one somehow getting even harder to kill is the Jailer, but that is obvious because you have so many more guilds finally being able to get past Anduin and past Lord of Dreads and past Raigalon. They are currently face planting their head in the Jailer and wiping, so currently the kill chance of the Jailer is going to be quite small. You're gonna see after next reset and the mega nerfs to the Jailer how much it is going to change in terms of kill chance for the Jailer itself. With this being said, we have all for today's recap of Raid Week 17. I'm losing count. Most of the news here are going to the buffed Spec Affliction getting better, as well as the previously buffed Spec Windwalker and Outlaw continuing to do quite well. Growth of Beast Mastery over Marksmanship in popularity, same for Fire, over Frost Mage in popularity, same for Outlaw, and a huge drop of Subtlety in popularity. And then we have to point out yet another serious round of nerfs to the bosses that is going to come live this week. With this being said, we have exhausted what to talk about for today. Thank you, of course, for watching the video, guys, and for helping to grow the channel, which also includes liking and commenting down below to help the channel grow even more, and also obviously subscribing to the channel, which for today, this one being a raid-centric video, I'm going to open up the subscription button to everyone who is going to get at the very least 2 Great Vault options at Mythic item level or 3 great vault options at heroic item level. It's up to you. Also, as an addendum, you can find me and follow me on Twitter, and also supporting me even more by subscribing to my Patreon, which will also give you access to my Discord channel as well. That will be greatly appreciated. I need to feed my family after all. With this being said, thank you guys again. See you guys soon. And in the meantime, my god, this is supposed to be the hottest day of the month, and the month just started. So I hope the weather broadcast was right and I'm not getting debated.